I have a bit of a confession to make. I've lived in Barcelona for 7 years, almost 8 at this point, and I have never in all that time been to Sagrada Familia. Of course, I've walked past it. It's the nearest major tourist attraction to my house in the Barrio de Clot, so I've seen the outside plenty of times. Covered in scaffolding and partially complete, it's by far the biggest thing around, and visible from all over the city. And it recently got even taller. Just a couple of weeks ago, the news reported that Sagrada Familia was finally finished. So, I've seen the outside, but I've never done the tour. I have an objection to paying 26 to 40 euros or more to visit something that's right in my own neighborhood. So I haven't been. Okay, let me walk back a couple of my previous statements. Technically, I have been inside Sagrada Familia, and it's not really finished. But last week they put the top on the highest tower, Torre de Jesucristo, making Sagrada Familia the world's tallest church at 172.5 meters. It actually surpassed Ulm Minster, a Lutheran church up in Ulm, Germany, in October 2025. It is also, depending on how you look at it, the tallest building in Barcelona. There's a communications tower that's taller up in Collserola, but that's not a building per se. And out in Sant Adrià de Besòs, there's an old power plant that's 208 meters tall. It's currently abandoned and anyway not in Barcelona, but you'll see it if you go out that way. In any case, 144 years after construction began, Sagrada Familia is now almost finished. Current estimates say that construction will continue in the basilica's interior through 2027 and 2028, and there's also a controversial plan for a staircase crossing Calle Mallorca, which might or might not be done by 2034. If the staircase plan moves forward, and the people building Sagrada Familia say that it will, several buildings will have to be demolished. I'm sure the anti-gentrification crowd will have a field day, because about 3,000 people would have to be evicted from their homes. The case is most likely going to end up in court. The Gloria facade on Calle Mallorca isn't anywhere near done, so we'll see what happens with that. In the meantime, Sagrada Familia is still covered in scaffolding and looks to be far from complete. Hey everybody, it's Daniel. Welcome back to Spain to Go, the best podcast in the entire multiverse for all things Spain. This is episode 133, and it's all about Sagrada Familia and the architect Antoni Gaudí. Quick shout out here to one of our sponsors, Walks Tours. If you would like to go over to expatmadrid.com/walks, you can sign up for a walking tour of beautiful places. One of the available tours is actually of Sagrada Familia. So if you're in Barcelona, you can sign up for a tour. As far as I can tell, they take you through at the best time of the afternoon. Everybody says that the best time to go to Sagrada Familia is in the afternoon with the light coming through the stained glass. And that seems to be when Walks Tours organizes its tours. Otherwise, I've been to the Prado Museum early morning tour in Madrid, and that was spectacular. They open it up an hour before anybody else is there, and you have the whole place to yourself for a while. Highly recommended. expatmadrid.com/walks. That is expatmadrid.com/walks. Back to the episode about Sagrada Familia here. Because I mentioned that I have been inside, I actually live relatively close by. And last year I went to Mass in the crypt, which isn't as exciting as I was expecting. It's a bit small and underground and crypt-like, not very colorful compared to the rest of the building. The access to the crypt is on Carrer de Sardenya, on the corner of Provença. The streets in that area are all named after parts of the former Catalan Empire, so they're regions of the Mediterranean, basically. Anyway, Calle Sardegna is where the crypt is. You can go in, you have to sweet talk the security guard, and he will let you in for Mass. It's free. Just look for Parroquia de la Sagrada Familia online, and you should find something. Otherwise, I don't generally spend a lot of time around Sagrada Familia. It's constantly slammed with people. Watch out for pickpockets. And it's surrounded by all sorts of fast food restaurants I never go to. In December, they have a Christmas market outside. That's also pretty crowded, and it has a lot of stuff for making your own nativity scene. If you want to buy moss or slabs of cork or tiny figures of camels, I guess that's the place to go. Also, the full basilica has an international mass on Sundays at 9 a.m. I've tried to go to that a couple of times, but space is limited and it's always been full when I arrive at 8:30ish, so I guess you need to get there earlier if you want to get in. If you're in the area during normal tourist hours, you'll probably spend the whole time dodging Instagram selfie artists and making sure you still have your wallet. The fact is, a lot of people in Barcelona are a bit ambivalent about these architectural monuments. If you live here, you probably want to avoid elbowing your way through crowds of tourists, so you might just avoid the biggest attractions. I'm not about to go to protests against it, but I'll admit that over-tourism is a real thing, especially in some Barcelona neighborhoods. Among the must-see things in Barcelona that I don't care about at all are La Pedrera, also known as Casa Milà. This one has an exhibition space inside where you can sometimes see nice art, but the main attraction is the building itself on Passeig de Gràcia. I have never been. Casa Batlló, also on Passeig de Gràcia, is a disaster during opening hours. You can barely walk past it on weekends and often on weekdays as well because of the huge crowds of tourists standing around. Basilica de la Sagrada Familia, as I said, always slammed with people and surrounded by crappy fast food restaurants, as well as those souvenir shops that sell t-shirts and panties that say, "I heart big dicks," or similar classy things. The Boqueria Market is another Barcelona must-see attraction that I don't like at all. Last time I checked, this place had filled up with stands selling a kind of Catalan burrito or some such monstrosity, which has no history. It was just invented a couple of years ago so that people could eat and walk. Presumably there are still local people who buy fish at Boqueria in the mornings, but not many. Finally, Park Güell. This is Guell Way. I was kind of annoyed when I found out how this is actually pronounced in Spanish. There are also 2 points over the U in way. In English, you would probably call it Park Güell. That's definitely what I called it for about 15 years, but now I know better. It's Park Güell, and I do not care at all. I actually did visit this one with my wife Morena on our second day in Barcelona. It costs 18 euros to get in, and I remember being pretty underwhelmed. So that's a roundup of must-see Barcelona attractions. I remember walking around during the pandemic when there were no tourists and seeing how regular Barcelona residents don't even look up when they walk past these places. That should tell you something. But let's get to the life of Antoni Gaudí, God's architect. 4 out of my 5 Barcelona musts up there were designed by Antoni Gaudí, the godfather of Catalan architectural modernism. He's the second topic of today's article. Gaudí was a pretty intense guy. Here's a sentence I like from the Wikipedia article about him. When handing him his degree, Elias Rogent, director of Barcelona Architecture School, said, "We have given this academic title either to a fool or a genius. Time will show." At the 1878 World's Fair in Paris, some of Gaudí's designs caught the eye of Catalan merchant Eusebi Güell, that is, of Park Güell, or Park Güell if you prefer. Only at this point there was no Park Güell. Eusebi Güell just had a large fortune and was ready to spend it on art, so he became a sponsor of Gaudí. You can check out Palau Way and the aforementioned park if you want. There are other way buildings around Barcelona as well. There's something outside town. And this actually did not make it into the article, but out in Astorga, in the province of León, there's a big, impressive building by Gaudí as well. I think it's the only thing outside Catalonia. Anyway, I've been out there to see that. If that is a part of Spain that is closer to you, then definitely check that out. León is pretty cool. Astorga is pretty cool. Anyway, sponsored by Eusebi Way, Gaudí produced a lot of his most famous work. But his main project was Sagrada Familia, which began construction in 1882 under a different architect. The next year, Gaudí took over and changed the original plan. He worked almost exclusively on Sagrada Familia from 1915 until his death in 1926. These days, the consensus is that Gaudí was a genius, and his buildings have certainly put Barcelona on the map for modernist architecture in Europe. This year, 2026, Barcelona has actually been named World Capital of Architecture by UNESCO. Slightly ironic, considering they can't even build housing anymore. That is the topic of another episode. Episode 109 is all about Spain's housing crisis. I've probably talked about it in other places too. It is ongoing and not getting any better. So check out episode 109 if you would like. Antoni Gaudí was a Catholic and a bit of a holy man. As he aged, his Catholic faith intensified, and it gets a bit weird. It's always worth keeping in mind that people's experiences and outlooks a century ago were quite different than today. Gaudí suffered from several diseases, escaped a cholera epidemic, and watched most of his friends and family die. During Lent in 1894, he apparently almost starved himself to death. He was saved by his friend Josep Torras y Bages, the Bishop of Vic, who argued that God's plan for him was to complete his work on the Sagrada Familia. Gaudí got up from bed immediately, his face shining and much relieved. He had something to eat and got back to work, apparently. Here's a quote from the man himself. "My good friends are dead. I have no family and no clients, no fortune nor anything. Now I can dedicate myself entirely to the church." He called Sagrada Familia the Cathedral of the Poor and would beg for alms to continue work on it. He also adopted a penniless holy man vibe, so much so that when he was hit by a streetcar in 1926, he was confused for a beggar and taken to a public hospital. He died a few days later and is buried in his own crypt under his masterpiece, La Basílica de la Sagrada Familia. Gaudí only lived to see one of Sagrada Familia's towers completed. He knew that his temple would be finished by future generations, so he left plans behind. In 1936, at the beginning of the Spanish Civil War, some anarchists broke in and burned Gaudí's workshop, including most of his sketches and plans. This was about 10 years after Gaudí's death. There were, however, photos of some of the scale models Gaudí had made during his lifetime. Those escaped the fire elsewhere, and his work was carried on by other architects after Franco won the Civil War. So what we're seeing today is a reconstruction of what Gaudí probably intended the building to look like. As to why the anarchists were burning churches at every opportunity, well, I guess it's a long story, but they burned churches and killed priests and nuns anywhere they could. They might have been more popular if they had concentrated on something else, but who knows? It was a long time ago. When George Orwell visited Barcelona during the Civil War, he declared that Sagrada Familia was one of the most hideous buildings in the world. He went on to say, "I think the anarchists showed bad taste in not blowing it up when they had the chance." Much more about George Orwell and his book Homage to Catalonia I think it's actually supposed to be pronounced homage, whatever. That's episode 37, however you pronounce it. George Orwell, in case you don't know, was in Spain for part of the Civil War before he went back to the UK and wrote his most famous works. So his third most famous work is actually about the Spanish Civil War, Homage to Catalonia. It's at least a famous book in Catalonia. I'm not sure if your average person knows what homage means, and I'm quite certain your average person has no idea what Catalonia means. So if you want, you can also stick to Animal Farm. However, that is neither here nor there. The fact is, George Orwell saw a partially complete version of Sagrada Familia, and he hated it. Anyway, let's talk about Antoni Gaudí's strange afterlife. A few months ago, I met up with a Chinese girl who had only been in Barcelona for a couple of days. I offered to walk her up to see Sagrada Familia from the outside, but she had never heard of it. I pulled up a picture on my phone and showed it to her. "Oh," she said, "Gaudí." I got the impression that in China they usually refer to the building by the name of its architect, and perhaps for good reason. The full name, Templo Expiatorio de la Sagrada Familia, doesn't really roll off the tongue. Sagrada Familia is a basilica, not a cathedral. Barcelona's cathedral is named Santa Creu y Santa Eulalia, and it is in the neighborhood incorrectly referred to as Gothic. Anyway, construction carries on a century after Gaudí. The year 2026 has even been declared the Gaudí year here in Barcelona. The Pope Leo XIV will be visiting Spain in June, and one of his stops is La Sagrada Familia to commemorate the 100th anniversary of Gaudí's death. Last year, a few days before dying, Pope Francis recognized Gaudí as venerable due to his heroic virtues. That is the first step on the path towards Catholic sainthood. The next step, Beatus, requires the performance of at least one miracle by the deceased. If you were to go down into the crypt at Sagrada Familia and pray to the remains of Gaudí, presumably he could intercede with God on your behalf. The miracle would need to be verified by authorities of the Catholic Church. This process often takes decades or even centuries. My previous episode, previous to this one, episode 132, is about Saint Ignatius of Loyola, if you would like to know more about the lives of Spanish saints. Either way, the path to sainthood is quite long. German poet Heinrich Heine, in the first half of the 19th century, famously said, "People in those old times had convictions. We moderns only have opinions, and it needs more than a mere opinion to erect a Gothic cathedral." Gaudí had conviction, but it was probably a rare thing in his day, and it's even rarer now. I wonder what he would make of the mass tourism around his various works today. In the early 20th century, I'm sure a few eccentric British people would make it down to Spain to gawk at the buildings, but nobody else. Gaudí would have had no way of imagining the crowds of tourists with selfie sticks buying sugary pastries and novelty underwear on the streets surrounding his masterpiece, then using his life's work, the Sagrada Familia, as the backdrop for some Instagram content. He probably also wouldn't like it much if he could see it. But eternity is a long time, and he may make it to sainthood one day. The trend of taking selfies in front of other people's monuments could come to an end, or it could be replaced by something dumber. Or they might eventually take the scaffolding off of Sagrada Familia. Time will show. Hopefully we'll be around to see it. That's about all I've got for today. I hope you are having a good day wherever you are in the world. If you would like more about Spanish saints, like I said, you can check out my previous episode to this, Saint Ignatius of Loyola. A couple of weeks ago, I also did an article and a podcast episode about Spanish ham as a tool of social exclusion. I think I called it pork politics, but some guy wrote an article about the sordid history of Spanish ham, and I decided to write a response. Okay, that is actually episode 131. Spanish ham and the culture wars is what I ended up calling that. I think the article over on expatmadrid.com is called Pork Politics. Either way, enjoy some of my recent content here on the blog and on the podcast. Like I said earlier, Walks Tours has very special early access and special access tours of exceptional locations around Europe. You can check that out at expatmadrid.com/walks. They're a sponsor, so I get a commission if you sign up for something there. But hey, that's a way to celebrate the podcast. Not to celebrate the podcast, to support the podcast. You could also celebrate the podcast if you would like, but support the podcast over at expatmadrid.com/walks by signing up for one of the tours. You could also go to expatmadrid.com/donate and donate directly to the cause. My last two episodes are about penniless holy men, St. Ignatius of Loyola and Antoni Gaudí. If you would like to stave off my descent into penniless holy man status myself, you can donate to the podcast. Just keep me attached to worldly concerns by sending some money over to expatmadrid.com/donate. You can send anything from 10 euros on up to however much you want. I've received plenty of donations from people in the past. It's great. I appreciate it a lot. expatmadrid.com/donate. I also have articles over there on expatmadrid.com about other aspects of Spanish culture. Holy Week is coming up, so you've got a recently updated article about some of the Holy Week traditions. There's all kinds of stuff over there. On YouTube, not only will you find all episodes of this podcast, but I also teach Spanish. Learn Spanish with Daniel is my channel name over there. Just put Learn Spanish with Daniel into the YouTube search and you will find me. I'm the guy with the ginger beard. Learn Spanish with Daniel. I've got a new video up this week about uses of the verb llamar in Spanish. Last week I've forgotten what I did last week. I've got several more recent videos up in case you haven't been there in a while. I'm trying to take this a bit more seriously and do something new every week. You can definitely help by supporting over at expatmadrid.com/donate. I appreciate it. You can contact me in any number of ways. If you have questions about Spanish, leave me a comment on something or send me a message. You can follow me on Instagram. I'm Daniel Welsh. That's WELSCH. You gotta spell it right. Daniel Welsh on Instagram. I'm happy to help you out with your Spain questions. Just let me know what the questions are. Nada más por hoy. Espero que pases un muy buen día. Estés donde estés en el mundo. Nothing else for today. I hope you're having a great day wherever you are in the world. Until next time, y hasta la próxima. Bye.